So, to debate this now, I'm joined by three experts on this very subject. And, of course, let us know what you think as well, gbviews@gbnews.uk. With me now is former NHS consultant and clinical psychologist and heart member Gary Sidley. Thank you very much, Gary. Infectious disease expert as well, Dr Bharat Pankania, and independent statistician and political commentator Jamie Jenkins. Hello all, fantastic stuff. So, look, where should we start with this? Dr Bharat, I'm going to just get your views. We'll do a quick whiz-through across where you're all at on this particular issue. Should we ban trick-or-treating? Dr Bharat, I'll start with you.
No, of course not, but it is a good opportunity to get the message across. Halloween has already happened. It's already 2200 hours. So what was to be has already been. My take on it would have been, go careful, go easy, and this is the really important bit, a missed opportunity, which is if you are congregating in large groups and you are not immunized, then here is your free license to put on as exotic a mask as you can think of making and wearing, and at least protect yourselves with a fancy, scary, message-giving mask.
Yeah.
What I want to say finally is, look, we have to live lives normally. What we have to do is mitigate the risks as well as we can. One of them is to be fully immunized. The other one is have a smaller circle of humans that you interact with, and test yourself frequently and make sure you're not infecting other people.
OK, Dr Bharat, thank you. Gary, I'm going to go to you now. Should we have cancelled trick-or-treating?
Definitely not, no.
Hey, it's good because you're a psychologist and heart member. It seems like you have got a heart as well, so carry on, Gary.
Yeah, our children have suffered hugely over the last 20 months or so from the restrictions. You know, they've been locked down, they've had the schools closed, they've been separated from their friends in bubbles, they've had their junior sports curtailed, the after-school activities have been curtailed, and as a result of that, you know, the mental health consequences have been quite severe. You know, only end of last year, 2020, a Prince's Trust survey found that 1 in 4 young people said they couldn't cope with life. Now, this is pretty significant stuff. And the mental health consequences, you know, we've had increases in deliberate self-harm, we've had increases in tics, we've had increases in low mood and anxiety. Eating disorders have gone through the roof. No, they deserve some fun, do our children. And I think the risk from trick-or-treating tonight, you know, is pretty negligible. You know, the risk to children is vanishingly small as a result of COVID. The risk of them passing it on is not as great as adult-to-adult transmission. And out in the open air, I think the risk is negligible. They're probably more likely to get knocked down by a car tonight than actually suffer any serious harm from COVID. Or if the weather's like this house here in Lancashire, they're more likely to succumb to exposure, I think, rather than COVID itself.
Never in a million years, surely. Well, independent statistician and political commentator Jamie Jenkins, I'm going to allow you to enter the fray now. Should we have banned trick-or-treating?
No, of course not, Patrick. I think one of the biggest risks, I think, from trick-or-treating I succumbed to last year was my children going out trick-or-treating, getting those kind of chewy sweets, and I couldn't get a dental appointment after snapping one of my teeth, and I've kind of got a big hole in my mouth at the moment. So I think that's probably one of the biggest risks. We know, cases of COVID have been coming down over the last couple of last 7 days or so, and that's in particular because we're testing fewer children in schools, and we know that majority of children have caught COVID now. I think we talk about ventilation, and I don't know what it's like across most of the parts of the country, but where I am in South Wales at the moment, it's absolutely blowing a gale. So I think if COVID can survive kind of with all the ventilation with regards to all of that, I think I'm a coach as well for the local football team, and the huge impact that the COVID has had with banning them from kind of sports and stuff. I think got to get out there, got to enjoy it, and crack on.
Yeah, Dr Bharat, we've already heard there that children are not particularly badly affected by the coronavirus as far as we can see so far. So, do you think really that in itself now is one of the major reasons why we can't keep having lockdown restrictions? We shouldn't have any more additional restrictions whatsoever, because actually kids aren't really at risk from this, are they?
I don't agree with you when kids are not at risk, because we have hospital admissions for children and we have deaths in children too. And I disagree with our psychologist panelist on the panel today that children do not infect others. In fact, children are drivers of infections. And if you look at any heat map, it will tell you quite clearly infections. Sorry,
That's all right. Well, we could.
infections
Okay.
infections start in schools and then pass on to the older age groups. Going forward, what we have to do, we are doing. Immunize the children, immunize them against SARS-CoV-2 as well as influenza. We've got our eyes off the influenza issue. This is extremely important. And you do your mitigations, which is you test and you make sure. This is the advice I give to schools. Uh, you teach, you do your normal teaching, and in return, the parents don't send in a infected, infectious student to you. And that is our agreement between the two. And that is the way forward that I have been dealing with in the schools that I
All right.
advise.
Okay, well, Gary, I'm gonna throw over to you. Is this the answer? Inoculate all the children, and then we can and then we can all roam free.
No, there's very little justification for vaccinating young kids. I think it's a disgrace that they're being pushed and blackmailed in some cases into doing it. And just to correct what the doc said, I didn't say that children never transmit the disease. I just said that child to adults was less significant than adult to adult transmission. But I think the big point for me is we've got to move away from this mono focus on just one pathogen, this obsessive focus to the exclusion of everything else. I know we've just been on COVID for the last 20 months, just on SARS-CoV-2 is the only thing that matters in town. 1,700 people die every year from every day, I beg your pardon, in the UK. A small proportion of those at the moment are COVID, and yet the idea about we've got to do everything and shut down our lives and that of our children's purely to try and reduce some kind of transmission of SARS-CoV-2 seems really self-destructive and unhelpful. Our society has become increasingly risk averse over the last 20 years, and that's accelerated in the last 20 months or so. Any life that's worth living has an element of risk in it. I remember a lady on television in the midst of the lockdown last year in a care home when she was asked about her thoughts, and she came out with the great phrase, "I want to live until I die."
Yeah.
And I think that captures the essence of it, really. So let's get away from this mono focus on COVID. Let's take into consideration all the damage that's been done by the restrictions, the increase in cardiac problems, cancer problems, stroke problems, the fact that 100 people are dying each day in excess of what we'd expect at this time of the year in their own homes, and a large majority of them will not be COVID related. So we've really got to take our blinkers off and take a wider perspective, I believe.
Okay, all right, Jamie, I'm going to throw over to you now. Obviously, as a political commentator, I want to get your take on what we're at, really, because I think, often politicians play things down the road, don't they? And they go, hey, I won't have to deal with this particular crisis. I'll just make a decision now and someone else will clean up this mess. I wonder if we are playing a very long game with this one. And what we've seen is the damage that this has caused to children, mental health-wise, just psychologically, really. That's going to actually massively affect this country going forward, I would have thought. I just wanted to get your views on that.
No, I think so, Patrick. We've had a huge problem over the last 18 months, and we've seen parts of the country as well where children's mental health services have been overwhelmed and they haven't been able to get the support that they need. As a coach, and it was devastating to see some of the children who couldn't come forward over the last kind of 18 months to do some sport because it was banned outdoors and things. We've got to look after the children and just looking at it more broadly, Patrick, as well. We've got a huge missing diagnosis over the last 18 months with regards to kind of NHS waiting lists are probably going to continue to increase over the next kind of year or two. And it's going to be difficult to kind of tackle all of that. So I think, the important thing is as we kind of go forward is that, we've got the booster vaccine going out, which is important. We're starting to see cases in over 80s coming down with regards to all of this. The majority of younger children have either had the infection now. So we've seen over the last week cases among children coming down. That's probably going to be a half-term effect because of less testing. But a huge amount of children have been infected by this virus now over the last kind of year and a half. I don't think vaccinating them is kind of the answer with regards to all of that. So I think, Patrick, we've got to look forward. We can't just focus on COVID. It's a national health service. It's not just the national COVID service. The big thing for me is that we're still seeing across the country, in particular in Wales, the number of people who are catching COVID in hospital and dying from that is still a big problem in the country.
Well,
so
that's it.
we've got to focus on these things.
Yeah, and in fact, so I opened up the show with a monologue there about Dennis Hutchins, who sadly passed away. I mean, he, in all likelihood, probably did contract COVID in hospital as well, to be perfectly honest with you. Dr. Barat, I know we were talking tonight about whether or not trick-or-treating should have been banned, but, bonfire night's coming up. Would you extinguish all of those?
I'm not going to say you extinguish anything. I'm not disagreeing with any of the panelists here. Actually, there is quite a lot of synergy between all three of us. What we have to do is be measured, do what we can, and prevention is much better than after the infection has occurred. Therefore, vaccines, I have to say, are one great big armamentum in prevention and protection. We already do the seasonal influenza vaccines for exactly the same reasons as SARS-CoV-2 vaccines have also been promoted. Prevention does work. It does do its job. We've got to do that. Apart from that, nobody is saying, I haven't said we need to have shutdowns, we need to have restrictions. We do what we can, and simple measures are well worth doing. Okay. And one more thing, when the National Health Service is overwhelmed, etc., it is not a reflection of this is the fault of COVID only. It is the fault of successive governments over the last 20 years who have not invested in the health service of the United Kingdom, which is a G7 country. It is a failure of politicians of all colours.
Well, I can't help. I just want to interject there. I can't help but feel like if there's a chance that the NHS. Okay, all right, Dr. Pratt. I can't help but feel like if there's a chance that the NHS is going to be overwhelmed, as indeed it seems to be almost every single year, I would imagine that GPs going on strike is probably the very last thing that we would want. Also, we've spent about 43% of our national expenditure on health and social care. I do wonder whether or not that's about the actual limit, to be perfectly honest with you, and really, frankly, whether or not the NHS, people in that NHS, should start spending that money a bit better. Gary, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think we have to concentrate on trying to expand our health service and increase the number of beds. It seems like we spent a lot of money on things that have been of very little use, like the test and trace, for instance, and that kind of money could have gone into looking at expanding our hospital provision. I don't know what the docs here say, but I'm old enough to remember the old infection hospitals, the ones that were in isolation themselves. The little hospitals on the top of the hill, often that just were dedicated to infectious diseases. I don't know whether there's mileage in thinking about a return to some of those, particularly in the light of the high level of infections that are actually contracted in hospitals themselves, which seems like, again, another major issue that needs to be addressed. So yes, I think I'll be in agreement with the panelists that we do need to expand our hospital provision and be creative and ingenious in the way we do that, and not waste our money on things that are not going to be beneficial.
And I'm afraid, because I'm getting shouted at quite a lot in my ear now. But I just want to squeeze Jamie in very quickly. Jamie, please don't get me in more trouble than I already am in. Do you think that Boris Johnson owes our kids an apology?
No, I think so, and it's not just Boris Johnson. You've got Nicola Sturgeon as well, Mark Drake, but across the country, children haven't had a great pandemic. Who has had a good pandemic? Apart from all of those consultants who are getting all this money through the NHS test and trace system. So I think, apology wouldn't go amiss, and that's the way forward, I think, Patrick.
Well, look, thank you very much, all of you, for not going trick-or-treating and indeed making the time for us right here on Tonight Live. That was former NHS consultant, clinical psychologist and heart member Gary Sidley, infectious disease expert Dr. Bharat Pankania, and independent statistician, still find it very tricky to say, and political commentator Jamie Jenkins. Thank you all for coming on tonight. Take care.